Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're listening to the Podium Podcast from. Welcome back to another episode. It is, of course, the 2026 Australian Grand Prix race review. Round one has been completed of 2026. There are a lot of questions that you can argue have been answered, some still haven't. There's been a lot of change. This is arguably one of the biggest changes we've seen in my time watching Formula One, and I'm sure for you, Aaron, as well. But Aaron, how are you doing first of all?
I am doing very well there. Very excited after the first race. It did not disappoint. I think the 3 month off season really had us building our anticipation for is it going to be an exciting race? Is it going to be a boring one? And we were not disappointed. So
Definitely. A
looking
lot to
forward to
talk
getting into
about.
this. Absolutely.
But, well, as we always start off in this channel, Aaron, what were your first thoughts about the races?
Yeah, I think one of the most memorable moments was even before we got to the grid with Oscar Piastri crashing out on the way to the grid. I think it was down in turn five. He just went over the curb, put it in the barrier, and that was his race over before it even started. So not the start that one of the biggest championship contenders last year would have wanted to start off this year.
Definitely. I think it's almost like he has such bad luck at his home race. Look at last year, he kind of just spun out whilst racing for the lead, but this year he didn't even get to start. And I would also go on to say that this wasn't down to as much as people think, yes, it was a driver error, but at the same time, I generally think it's something to do with the unreliability of the cars and obviously being the regulations being quite immature. Piastri did note that, to be fair, that 100 kilowatts worth of energy was deployed, which he didn't expect. It wasn't sort of coded in. It was just random, and he caught him out. And it also shows that well, we get on to a lot of the racing, but it's still very, it's not as what we've had over the last couple of years where it's been quite straightforward. It seems that there are still a couple of bits where the teams are still struggling on, maybe getting off the line or in the braking zones, but there's still not everyone is on the same playing field yet, which I would definitely say, which to be fair, we can talk about it now, but that start was one of the craziest starts I've ever seen, to be fair.
Yeah, definitely one of the highlights of the race. I mean, you had Leclerc leaping off the line. We already saw in testing that Ferrari's start procedure was one of the best, if not the best on the grid, and they clearly demonstrated it in the race. Leclerc to the lead. Hamilton was up there in the top two, three, just went over the grass, but he did make up a couple of positions on the first lap, and he was in third position by the end of the first lap.
Yeah.
So in terms of testing, Ferrari clearly showed that they've got the pace. They they got their track position and they were able to maintain it throughout the race. So definitely a good little innovation from Ferrari. I think that can safely be said.
And in all honesty, it wasn't just at the front where we had a little bit of a gap disparity between the front rows. We saw behind that people can get bogged down, which we saw that absolutely incredible save by Colapinto, which honestly that was crazy in its own self. But it shows that there is such a difference in speed from all the different drivers. Where would you say that there's a sort of safety issue there with so many different speeds? There's something bound to happen at one part of this season.
I definitely agree. I think last week when we were talking about the disparity between the grid, I actually made the bold prediction that these new regulations were going to start to converge the grid. How wrong I was. We had Lance Stroll getting lapped 15 times by the end of the race. So yeah, clearly there is a big speed disparity, and Max Verstappen even said it himself that overtaking those cars was not exciting when he was 2 seconds a lap faster.
I
So
mean,
we're definitely going to see the top three teams run away. Lando Norris didn't have the most hair-raising performance, it has to be said. He was stuck in around sixth or seventh for most of the race.
indeed, indeed. Well, let's talk about actually the top runners because it seemed after lights out and it was a Leclerc, Mercedes, it was Leclerc and Russell right at the front, and then it seemed also that just it was just Mercedes and Ferrari at the front, one, two, three, four, and there was like a good 10, 12 second gap between themselves, and I think it was it Lando in P4 or in P5? It must have been. But
I think Arvin Lindblad and Oliver Behrman were somewhere around there as well. I'll check
yeah, I mean, I think there were.
standings after that race.
I mean, to be fair, Lembla did extremely well, which we'll get onto later. But we always had an inkling that Mercedes were going to be the runners, and if we looked at it at qualifying, to be fair, 8 tenths clear of Isaac Hadjar in P3. Generally, I did think that Mercedes were going to run away with not just this race, but the season overall. But it seems that Ferrari definitely have they can bring a fight to Mercedes. If not they're only at 1/10, they might be on the level of Mercedes, in all honesty.
I think we definitely got to touch on. I think this is the point in the video where we start to touch on Ferrari's strategy. There was no way we were going to avoid it. And I think we've come to that point. So give me your thoughts.
Well, in all honesty, I if you look at the race pace, Ferrari were on it. Ferrari could easily go to Mercedes and bring a fight to them. But when you have a 7-time world champion, which you've paid over the odds for, and he's telling you just pit one of us, you kind of have to do what he says. I don't know why they didn't pit one of them at least to give Mercedes a little bit of a headache to work with. But it seems like they just it's like there's new regulations, it's a new season, but it's the same old Ferrari in that sense because if they didn't, which they didn't pit, they kind of were fighting with only one hand. If they pitted, I think that they could have given Ferrari or Mercedes a fight. And I know people say that the pit lane was closed when um, obviously Bottas pulled up near the entry of the pit lane. But at the same time, they had a whole one lap before to decide to pit, and they should have because it costed them the race. And I would say definitely cost them the race. What about you, Aaron? What do you think?
Yeah, I might be one of the few analysts who is going to come with a controversial opinion that it wasn't one of Ferrari's worst decisions. So let me just explain briefly. So the first VSC that was caused by the Hadjar retirement, the Ferrari explanation for that was that they were looking for Plan A. Now, Plan A was a one-stop strategy. If you look at when Hadjar retired, I think it was around maybe lap 18, lap 19. I think Ferrari realized that they couldn't make the one-stop work if they stopped so early.
No,
So
to be
that's
fair,
why
it
they
was earlier. It was lap 13 where he
lap
pulled.
13. Exactly. So it pretty much would have resigned to resorting to plan B, which would have most likely been the two stopper. I think that they thought that they could hang on. Mercedes would have to stop twice, and essentially Ferrari would be able to defend at the end of the race, even on the older tyres. So that's probably the explanation for the first one. The second one, they could have stopped, but I think Bernie Collins came in and said that when Bottas had retired, they had just gone over the lines. They wouldn't have been able to immediately get into the pits. And then there was also the worry over how long that VSC was going to last. And I think they were dithering about it so much that they ended up just not making a decision, which ended up being the worst possible decision because Martin Brundle said that they would have made that if they had stopped on that second lap, they probably would have made it out before the
Hmm.
VSC had been taken out and they were underway.
But I would say to that is that they were also, for me, were also banking on a proper safety car or a red flag more later in the race, which, to my surprise, didn't happen. There was only two virtual safety cars. The safety car did not come out. But I would say maybe Ferrari kind of I misjudged and underestimated their own ability to conserve tires because if we saw both Ferrari and Mercedes are easily the best in tire conservation because Mercedes made that one stop work. In honesty, they didn't pit twice; they pit once. So maybe it's down to yeah a misjudgment in their own half, but it seemed anyway. Regardless, at the end at the end stint, I did expect Leclerc to be chasing the Mercedes down with fresher tires and to put some sort of pressure on. But I mean, you'll be happy about this. But it seemed Hamilton arguably had the quickest second stint, and throughout this weekend, he has been matching Leclerc, if not beating Leclerc. So what would you say for him finally getting some sort of performance back?
Absolutely, very happy as a Lewis Hamilton fan. I've definitely got a bit of bias there, but he did end up crossing the line only 6 tenths behind Leclerc as well. So very promising. It looks like he's got a bit of confidence back. If you saw his post-race interview, he wasn't even annoyed about the Ferrari strategy. He was actually just happy to have gained that fourth place. I think it's going to give him a little bit of confidence going into the second race of the season. You know that Lewis performs his best when he is confident and when he is happy with the car. He said he was happy with the car before preseason testing. He felt he had a bit more involvement with it. So I think with a bit more comfort, I think podiums and even potential race wins are not out of the question for the seven-time world champion.
Definitely. And I would say that realistically, Ferrari started off the year fairly strong, a third and a fourth, and they've definitely got places and they've got areas to improve on. And if you look at it, and I was looking at some data on some YouTube channel beforehand, but it shows that Ferrari are a lot better in low speed corners and medium speed corners than Mercedes. If we look at China next year, sorry, China this week actually, you look at that first sector. Yes, I know there's a massive straight, but that first sector, Ferrari could definitely maximize their capability for sure. So. Personally, you look at someone like Hamilton, who took a sprint win there last year. China could look fairly strong, but we'll save that for China predictions later this week. Next talking point I think would be interesting would be the actual racing and overtaking. We had an incredible battle for some in those first opening laps, but for some it seemed almost man-made and almost video game-like. We heard Leclerc saying that it was like he was playing Mario Kart. Do you think this is better than what we've had before, or is this too man-made and too almost game-like and comedic that it's not part of Formula One?
Yeah, there's definitely two sides to it. To give you a straight answer, I think it's too early to come to that decision. I think I want to wait and see what China has to hold. Obviously, the argument for it being video game was like after the first 20 laps, it did start to die down.
Hmm.
Um, and I think people were sort of annoyed that it was like you could just overtake every few corners. It wasn't like the DRS where you would wait to the DRS zone. And there was a little bit of tactics being played, but it wasn't like such the case that harvesting energy would. I think we also need to talk about how much of an effect harvesting the battery and deploying that battery has. It is such a powerful effect. We
Hmm.
saw George Russell coming from a long way back after turn I think it was turn one. He just made the move on Leclerc, and that's not even a super long straight. And he had already overtaken Leclerc and made the move by the time they even got down to the braking zone.
I would say that we as Formula One fans have been used to such a one style of overtake, which would be realistically chucking it down the inside at turn one, or a corner with a lot of with a big braking zone and just basically making a move and then getting a better exit. But here it's almost like overtaking has changed completely. There is no more braking zones have almost become non-existent for overtake. You can overtake now on a straight with ease, which looks quite cool, I guess, for a casual viewer because you see so many different cars moving and mixing, and there's lead and there's I mean, there was 120 overtakes just in this Grand Prix compared to the 60 we had last year. So there's double. But is it quality over quantity? Are we going to see moves like we've seen, the greats make, like I don't know, Alonso 130R over Schumacher in Japan, or are we going to see just not basic moves, but more just a pass on a straight, and then I hope that they recharge before the driver behind manages to get past. But to caveat that, I do say that Australia in terms of this new energy system is one of the worst tracks, is very, very throttle heavy, which means that recharging the battery is very difficult. We go to someone like China, and I agree with you, Aaron. China could be a completely different story. So, how long would you give it before you can finally make an estimation on or a judgment on the quality of racing?
I think give it a few races, but something else that was I found deeply unsatisfying was when the overtakes were made, and I'll go back to Max Verstappen's overtakes. The battery would just cut out, and you'd start to see them slow down as the miles before they even approached the braking zone. And it was just like
Hmm.
it didn't feel like F1 in a weird way. It felt like they weren't reaching top speed. They were, and then they were just slowly slowing down, and then we didn't know if they were going to make the move. I don't know how to explain it, but that was
Is
something that I didn't really like as much.
and I'll say for Formula One, we've been used to um, full speed until your braking distance. That is literally it. There is no other way of racing but to go full speed, pedal to the metal, and then brake. But here it seems is like almost. counterintuitive because you're so used to the car going really, really fast, like on like the Halo dash cam, for example, really fast and then braking. But here it's just so I mean the cars are extremely quick in a straight line. They are rapid, but it's that weird with the um uh, what's it called again? The not clicking.
Super clipping.
Clipping, yeah, yeah, clipping. With the super clipping now, and it might be well, it might be just an Australia thing, but then we look at China and that massive straight. I mean, surely the only way F1 can kind of combat this is by allowing the engine because didn't they make a there's a limit that they can reach, and then after that they clip, no?
Yeah, something like that. You think about that long back straight on the Chinese Grand Prix in Shanghai. Those
Yeah, well,
cars are going to be cutting out very early on down that straight.
but you think about something like Monza. Monza would be chaotic as hell. You won't even get past the pit straight, and then you'll be slowing down. So, I mean, it's something that F1 definitely needs to look at. I would say qualifying as well is not going to be as interesting as we would see it because the cars are just not on the edges what we're used to. But would you mind that for better racing, more action? Oh, it's a difficult one.
Well, it goes back to that question, is it really better racing or is
Mm,
it just manufactured battles? I found it exciting, but would I find it exciting if it repeats, if that same
mm.
recipe is repeated for four races in a row where you have Leclerc and Russell overtaking each other four times, the order's established, and then nothing else happens for the rest of the race?
I
I
know
don't think so.
it's only
And I feel like it
interesting.
goes against the DNA of Formula One. Like you said, it's always been accelerate hard, get to top speed, make the overtake, slow down. But now it's like charge the battery, be very tactical, cut out halfway down the straight, and then rinse and repeat.
Mm. It's very what's the right word? Yeah, it's very man-made and it's very it's interesting because it's completely different to what anyone else has seen. But you're right, give it time, and if we keep on saying it, and the moves are repetitive, because you can't even overtake in a corner as it was because you're harvesting. So I mean, it's only going to be. We did see a good move Leclerc made on Russell in turn nine, which was great. Or when Leclerc made that move turn two, which looked quite cool to be fair. But I think it's also track dependent, so we need to give that time. Okay, well, Aaron, after round one, who was your winner of the week? It could be a team or a driver. Who would you say and why?
I'm going to go with the standout performance of Arvid Lindblad. He wasn't really on my radar this season, but he really showed levels to to his teammate Liam Lawson.
That
Had a great battle with Oliver Behrman. He was actually fourth after the first lap. He was battling with Isaac Hadjar and the seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. He was even defending well from Max Verstappen at one point. He really showed confidence on that track, and I think it's going to continue. So very excited to see what the future holds for the 18-year-old.
Definitely. He had an incredible debut. He was in third position for a part of the Grand Prix, fending off, yeah, Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen. He did phenomenal. He did, compared to what his teammate, yes, his teammate really had a really, really poor start, which might not be his fault. But in these new regulations, with a new sense of driving. He came, he saw, and he did fantastically well. And so I really hope that he can use this as a stepping block. And yeah, who knows? This person, to be fair, Lindblad, he didn't have much of a hype as, for example, Antonelli coming in or Piastri coming in, but he's definitely impressed me so far. I did not expect a points scoring performance from him at all. And so he's done fantastically well. And that RB looks also really, really strong. So definitely something to build upon. My driver of or winner of the week um, is going to be is definitely going to be Mercedes 1-2 in qualifying, 1-2 in a race. They have meant as they've mean to go on. They dominated qualifying. They fended off Leclerc in the race. And I really, really think that they are title favorites for sure, but not as strong as title favorites as we expected definitely.
Absolutely. And yeah, going back to your point, yeah, Lindblad didn't have the same sort of hype as Piastri coming in, but he silently just joined the grid, silently put in a good performance in qualifying, and in the race he just came alive. So very promising. And Mercedes as well. I know you weren't too hot on Antonelli in our 2026 season
No, I
predictions,
wasn't.
but he showed a really mature drive, I would say. Um,
Definitely.
really stayed out of trouble, kept his nose clean, and made it all the way up to P2 in the end.
Hmm. Well, aside from his FB3 crash, yeah, he did fantastically well. And it shows that, in honesty, he was only 2/10 of Russell. And so he is definitely, you can say, a title contender for sure. And I regret to say that his win looks fairly um, close. But yeah, okay. Now, flop of the week. Aaron, who did not surpass your expectations?
Well, I think flop, I've got a couple in mind. Unlucky, well, you could start by looking at Isaac Hadjar. He was running really well in the race, and he just lost drive, unfortunately. I think it was a hydraulic failure, according to David Coulthard. That put him out of the race. He was very disappointed. I think last year as well, he didn't even get to finish the Australian Grand Prix.
Didn't even get
So
to start it.
he didn't even get started. So a couple of years of bad luck at that circuit. Oscar Piastri as well, very bad luck. Uh, Max Verstappen as well, crashing out in qualifying. But
Mm,
in terms of underperformance, it's got to be Aston Martin, I would say. One of their drivers didn't make it to the end, and the other was 15 laps down by the end of the race. So I think the performance speaks for itself. It's almost, as we say, it's almost making racing unsafe for that team.
mm,
Uh, the Cadillac team, nothing special as well. Bottas retired as well, if you remember, just outside the pit lane entry. So I think it's going to be a tough season for both those teams.
definitely. I mean, you look at the data and look at the graphs, everyone's within around 1 or 2 seconds, and they're almost 4 seconds off the pace. But it's also expected for Cadillac, new team, they need time to settle in, and this year's almost a write-off for them because they are focusing on just improving it anyway. So definitely. Um, yeah. I thought flop of the week. I went with who did I go with now? Um, I went with Piastri, definitely. Piastri, home Grand Prix, he's got a decent car underneath him. Not a title contender, but at least a very decent car. And just a little error in just going to the grid. Someone of his caliber you don't really expect, but it just might be a car issue and just completely destroys any hope of having a decent home Grand Prix. And something he hasn't had a race in these new formula, and he's going to go into sprint weekend in the second race of the season. So not the best of weekends for him, definitely. Um, well, I'm doing well. I mean, Aaron can join as well, definitely. But I fairly did well, good in my fantasy. I scored 208 points over the weekend, which I would say is a job well done. My biggest scorer, Charles Leclerc, and in my predictions, which I would highly recommend Aaron gets on because it is really good on the F1 website. You can predict like pretty much anything and everything. And I actually got 60% of the questions correct, the predictions correct for this weekend, which I'm very happy about. And I'm sure Aaron will get on to next week. Definitely. Okay, Aaron, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, one more thing I think we need to talk about is the title defense of the reigning world champion Lando Norris. I don't think it would be a good episode if we didn't talk about the 2025 world champion first performance out with the new uh, number one on his helmet, number one on his car. What do we think?
Well, to be fair, LN1, he didn't really have the best start to the season. People didn't really go into 2026 thinking McLaren were going to be, title favorites. But considering that they've won world championships back to back in 24, 25, and they've got a world champion amongst them right now, they've definitely had not a they've had a quiet start to the season. P5, he held off Verstappen at the end, which is admirable, but he was definitely one of the most vocal about the cars not giving not surpassing expectation. at sorry, talk about the cars not being anywhere of the expectation of what they were like and how they will ruin F1. So there's been more highlights from him off the track complaining about the cars rather than him, doing anything spectacular on the track, really, from my point of view. So I think McLaren can build on this. It's not like they're not going to be out the equation forever. I think give them half a season and they'll be fighting for podiums, but they haven't had the start that they wanted for sure.
Definitely. And I think it is very interesting going into next week. I think we're being treated after a long drought of no F1. We've got back-to-back races and a slightly later start for us in the UK at 7 a.m. I think the race is.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely excited, and I think the fans are definitely excited for your Chinese F1 predictions that will be coming out very soon. But I don't want to spoil too much.
Well, people who are listening to this will have to wait until Thursday for the Chinese Grand Prix predictions. Anyway, thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it because I certainly did. Anyway, that will wrap up a round one review of Australia in 2026. Make sure to like and subscribe and have a simply lovely day. Goodbye.